Good morning.
This meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board will come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Shane?
Here.
Vice Chair Richards?
Here.
Director Rossi? Director Curtin?
Here.
Director Paskett?
Here.
Director Lowenthal?
Here.
Director Camacho?
Here.
Senator Bell? Assemblymember Arambula?
Here.
Chair Richard?
I'm here. If they could make the mics a little less live, we're getting a lot of reverb. But, Director Camacho, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to begin this morning by welcoming Dr. Joaquin Arambula, member of the California Assembly. As I mentioned at the last board meeting, the legislature enacted a bill by Assemblymember Frazier that provides for ex officio members from the legislature to sit on this body. The Speaker of the Assembly designated Dr. Arambula as the Assembly's member, and the pro tem of the Senate designated Senator Jim Bell as the Senate's member. Senator Bell, I know, couldn't be here this morning, but I'm meeting with him later today. He's got a very strong interest in the success of the program, and we will benefit from having additional oversight and support from the legislature. Dr. Arambula, I don't know if you'd like to just say a few words at this point.
Just thanks for having me and looking forward to this.
Thank you, sir. Well, he's certainly less verbose than the chair, that's for sure.
All of us, really.
Everybody's less verbose.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Okay. We will begin as we do with the public comment period. And I'm just looking to see if we have any members of the elected members. We don't. So we'll take these in the order in which they were received. First, it'll be Mr. Roland LeBrun, followed by Steve Roberts, and then Alan Scott.
Good morning, Chair Richard and directors. I'd like to start the day by applauding you for providing Secretary Kelly with a sensible framework for expending property bonds in the peninsula in compliance with the Bond Act. The second item I'd like to touch on is item number 3 on today's agenda, and recommend that, given the current staff situation in Northern California, you consider appointing a member of the peer review group as an alternate for the TJPA board director position. Last but not least, I'd like you to be aware that the cities of San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy already have or are currently in the process of joining San Francisco in hiring qualified engineering firms capable of developing world-class alternatives to those developed by the now defunct Parsons Brinckerhoff. In closing, I'm asking you to terminate the rail delivery partner contract at the earliest opportunity, and either award this contract to the Bechtel Consortium, which was the only other qualified bidder back in 2015, or reissue the RFP and start all over again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. LeBrun. Steve Roberts from RailPac, followed by Alan Scott, and then Leanne Eber.
Good morning, Chairman Richard and the board members. Thank you for allowing me to address you.
Hold on 1 second, sir. Is this gentleman's microphone working? Can people hear him in the back? Okay, I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
On behalf of the Rail Passenger Association of California, we have some suggestions for the early train operator RFP, not to overly complicate it or detail it, but because of the long lead time and complexity of the issues outlined. To the general consulting services section under item 14, we suggest you add contractor will take a lead role in the development of a comprehensive information, reservation, ticketing, and fare calculation system. The current California train bus network is very large, with lots of city pairs, lots of schedules. When you overlay high-speed rail and some commuter connections, it's going to be massive. It's going to be larger than any airline network in the world because of the number of city pairs and schedules. You need to an early decision will be whether to build your own California-centric reservation system or to contract with one of the existing rail reservation systems. And if you contract with one of the rail reservation systems, they'll have a major increase in their capacity. The bottom line is that it's a long lead time issue. Also, I'm assuming that you would want to connect and do co-chairs with the airlines at Millbrae and Burbank. In order to do that, you need to be able to talk to the global distribution systems, the old WorldSpans and Apollos and Sabres. So you're going to need to meet the protocols of the International Air Transport Association. It's not a major task, but it's a lead time task. The next, recommendation is add to the general consulting sections under station design, seamless access for passengers with bicycles and baggage. To the general consulting services section under rolling stock design, capacity for passengers with bicycles and baggage. The storage of bicycles is mentioned back in the term sheet, but no reference is made to incorporating bicycles or passenger baggage in station design or rolling stock design. I have experienced traveling on BART in the small BART elevators, slow BART elevators. I would hope you do something better than that.
Mr. Roberts,
yeah.
Do you have material that you can provide us? I just want to be fair to everybody who's going to speak
Right.
this morning.
I did have an attachment. You have there's copies of it. I'll finish up real quick.
Okay.
The last thing is not an RFP issue, but it's a service integration issue, which was mentioned in the RFP, and that is that oftentimes service integration is due to problems, institutional problems, financial problems, and the authority should create a mechanism to encourage early train operator to identify and elevate interagency policy issues that are barriers to service integration as soon as they arise and not try to soldier through on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your suggestions, sir. I'll ask our interim CEO to consider those. Good morning, Mr. Scott. And Mr. Scott will be followed by Leanne Eager and then Stuart Flashman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. Alan Scott, Kings County. Again, I'm here to talk about finances and some issues. We begin with the state funded and unfunded debt is at $1.3 trillion. That is 52% of the gross state product of $2.5 trillion. And the first word should have been trillion, not billion. Not included in the billions of dollars deferred maintenance and upgrades to California infrastructure to the extent California government has not maintained investments in infrastructure maintenance and upgrades to keep up with the normal wear and tear and the pace of the expanding population. It has passed this cost on to future generations who will have to issue additional debt to pay for this expense. What's more, beyond repair, Governor Brown has announced that got a good breeze here, has announced that the state has $187 billion unmet water and transportation infrastructure needs. Where's the money for that? May 1st, the snowpack was 196% of the water equivalent of 43.5 inches, as reported by the Department of Water Resources. The damage is coming up from the floods, and the water damage is I don't think we have any money in the bank to even handle that. I don't know how that's going to get paid for. The estimate right now from Caltrans is $866 million. And following that, at a local level, cities and counties, and this is right off the web,
would need another $7.2 billion to bring their streets and roads back up to working order. The total cost over the next 10 years would be $132 billion. Where's the money? And following up, you paid $90 million for delays in CP1, the taxpayers' money. But let me just move on down. The Oroville Dam, you've got a problem there. You've got a problem with up in the Bay Area on some minor stuff, which is probably it's out of whack. BART is having overtime payment issues. Again, they've now found 4 people altogether, somewhere around $600 million in overpayments for janitors and BART. The Coastal Highway 101, with the weather problems that just came up, I have a friend that just drove down from Ferndale, and he reports that it's a mess up there. Absolutely a mess in Northern California.
Mr. Scott, I'm going to.
And I've got one more thing, and that's it. Yep, thank you. Let us not forget the proposed $400 billion health care bill pending. Where's the money for that?
Okay. Thank you, sir. As Ms. Eager comes up, Mr. Roberts, I did find your letter. It was under my folio, so I just wanted to make sure you knew that we had that. Thank you, sir. Leanne Eager, good morning.
Good
Should
morning.
be followed by Stuart Flashman.
Wow, in between Mr. Scott and Mr. Fleischman. Well, it's always a pleasure. And welcome, Assemblyman Arambula. You will be a wonderful addition to this board. For those of you who don't know, I'm the CEO and president of the Economic Development Corporation in Fresno, and we have been assisting with relocating about 178 businesses so far on the alignment and assisting with 333. And just recently, we had a very difficult relocation, and the behind-the-scenes finagling got to be so intense that one day we finally just had to walk away and laugh and say, if people only knew. And I think the only one that will ever really know is Diana Gomez. But one of the things when we came out of that, someone came to me and said, okay, you have to write a book, really. When this is all over, you have to write a book. So I'm going to give you a couple little snippets out of this upcoming book, and hopefully by the time this is over, I'll still be able to write. One of those chapters will be about unforeseen opportunities. And some of you had heard about our truck driver school. And that came about because John Lawson, who owns Lawson Truck and Oil, we were talking to him, we were able to save his business. He gets to stay in business. And we had said, when High Speed Rail's up and running, will you be able to work on this project? And he said, I can't. I don't have enough truck drivers. And he said, and no one in this valley has enough truck drivers to be able to help with this project. So we went to Department of Social Services and said, we need a truck driving school. We need to put our people who are actually unemployed into the truck driving school. So the Welfare to Work folks, we are on cohort number 19. We have about an 82% placement. But in addition to that, step 2 to that story is one of the very first people who graduated from that class now owns his own trucking business. He was on welfare 3 years ago. He now owns his own business. He now bought 2 trucks, and he only hires people out of that particular program to give people a chance. And very quickly, the last chapter of that book will be Love Amongst the Rails. We had a gentleman who owned a mini storage, and he was 92 years old. He didn't want to retire, but the rail was going to make it so that he couldn't keep his mini storage. And he lived up above his office, and I went and visited him often, trying to get him to make a deal. One of the things he didn't have was a bookkeeper, so he hired a young, lovely 78-year-old bookkeeper, and she came to assist him. And finally a deal was made, and I went on his last day to make sure that everything was okay, and he said, well, I just have to tell you, we got married, we have moved to the coast, and we're living happily ever after. So High Speed Rail does have a good ending. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eager. Very nice. Okay, I'm sure with another uplifting story like that will be Stuart Flashman.
Good morning, Chair Richard and board members. I'm afraid I can't top that. I do want to start by just with a sort of a technical thing, which is that Mr. Fellons has some papers for you, which I just gave him. And I think you've already seen those papers. This has to do with the lawsuit against the High Speed Rail Authority and against the state of California on the latest funding plans that were approved back in December. And I want to say a few words about those and specifically about the funding plan that you have before you today. Those funding plans and the one you have before you today are all relying on AB 1889 to say they comply with Prop 1A. And with all due respect to the Assembly member, the California legislature has no authority to reinterpret a ballot measure that's been approved by the voters of California. That's something for the courts. It's not for you, it's not for the legislature. It's basically for the courts to determine what did the voters intend when they approved that ballot measure. And if they intended something, the legislature has no authority to change that. And regardless of what the legislature may try to do, it can't be successful. And you should be aware of that. You should be aware that the legislature's interpretation of a ballot measure some 9 years after it was approved by the voters has no value. And if you doubt that, you should ask an attorney. In fact, you should be asking an attorney in general about approving these funding plans, because you need to know whether they comply or not, because if you go ahead and approve these and they're unconstitutional and you went ahead without any concern about the legality of what you were doing, that is not taking due care. And that's one of your responsibilities as board members, is to take due care. So I would urge you not to approve the funding plan today, because that funding plan is for something that is by no stretch of the imagination anywhere close to being suitable and ready for high-speed train operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flashman. I'll just note that I did get the papers. They were put in an unstamped envelope in my mailbox, which I think is kind of a no-no. But anyway, we'll move on from there. Mark Designee, I believe it is. And if I mispronounce that, sir, I apologize. Thank you. And then Ross Browning afterwards. Good morning, Mr. Designee.
Good morning, Chair Richards and Directors. I'm speaking here for item number 3. I'm Mark Zabani with the Transbay Joint Powers Authority. I'm the Executive Director. On behalf of the TJPA Board, I would like to thank the California High-Speed Rail Authority for considering our invitation to join the TJPA as a new member of the agency. As you know, the Transbay program is being developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 being the construction of the transit center for bus operations, and Phase 2 being the development of the downtown extension that would bring Caltrain and high-speed rail from the current Caltrain terminus at the 4th and King station into the transit center. The Transbay program is at somewhat of a transition point, with the first phase nearing completion and bus operations expected to start in the spring of next year. We're hoping to start by March of 2018 with bus operations. At this juncture, with Phase 1 nearing completion, the TJPA desires to ensure that the agency has the strategic leadership to develop federal, state, regional, and local consensus and support to successfully deliver Phase 2 and bring trains to the transit center in the quickest, most efficient, and most cost-effective way possible. To that end, the TJPA Board strongly believes that the California High-Speed Rail Authority's membership in the TJPA will facilitate the consensus and support that is critical to successfully complete the downtown extension, especially given that the California High-Speed Rail Authority is a major stakeholder, I want to say shareholder too, stakeholder in the development and operations of the downtown extension.
If you're offering us shares, we can talk.
Penny stocks. So with that, I really hope that the board today will accept this invitation and join the partnership charged with implementing this crucial piece of rail network in Northern California. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have now or when the item comes up.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your coming today. Ross Browning. Morning, Mr. Browning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm going to cancel all this stuff in the front and just get back to some nitty-gritty. At a hearing last Wednesday, the judge decreed that this family that I'm going to talk, that I have talked about and will continue to talk about, to be out of their home by mid-August with nowhere to go. What has occurred leading up to this decision? This family was giving a list of 5 contractors to select to rebuild their home. They selected 3 that had Better Business Bureau endorsements and submitted these data to your minions, only to have them refused and accuse them of being in collusion with the contractors to raise the bids. These are your recommended business partners. Nice group. They were offered a home that the authority had previously condemned, and thereafter only to find out that they no longer needed the home. The inspection of the house found that it had been stripped of all copper wiring, and they had no clue as to how long it would take to repair this wiring to get an inspection and to get a certificate of occupancy. At the last hearing, an issue of rural lifestyle which was chosen, and the judge said you'll just have to have a lifestyle without horses and without the rural. You can do it in Visalia. Well, the kids go to school in Corcoran. The judge says they have schools in Visalia. I'll give you 2 weeks more to get the kids there in Visalia. We have family and friends here. Go visit them when you want. Just drive over. We work in Corcoran. Just drive over. It's only 40 miles round trip, 2 cars. So either change jobs or learn how to drive 40 miles. At some point in all of this, your people could have given more time to them and put them in a direction that they hadn't up to then. But they just sat there like bumps on a log in this hearing while they watched the family unit be systematically and thoroughly, albeit legally, destroyed. They have worked with the authority, sometimes leading and most of the time following, and waiting only to have the authority change direction with little or no notice. What am I leading up to in all this? Mr. Richard, you came to our house. You parked your vehicle. You walked over, we said hi. Everybody had a great time, and you said, I will make you whole. I will see that you come out of this whole. It looks like we have a different definition of whole. So here's a family that's hurting. They have nowhere to go. They can either board out their horses, which they've spent all of the money on lawyers trying to fight this thing. There are solutions, but the people that they meet with change direction on them all
Okay,
constantly.
Mr. Browning, let me do this, sir.
Okay.
I'm going to ask our CEO to work with Ms. Gomez. I'd appreciate getting sort of a full explication of the facts, and we're constantly trying to make sure that the process that we have are fair, but all processes can be improved.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I'm going to ask our staff to look into this and get back to us on it. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we will.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
happy to do that.
Thank you. That is the last speaker card that I have. And so with that, we will conclude the public comment period. I want to thank everybody for coming. Some people have come from long distances to speak before us today. We'll now turn to our regular agenda. And we do item 1 and 2. And then we'll do this. Okay, so the first is this being June. It's the annual season for the election of board officers. And I think what we'll do is I'll first open the office for vice chair and ask for nominations for...
May I nominate Mr. Richards, Tom Richards?
Tom Richards, okay.
Second.
Okay, Tom has been nominated by Director Pasquette, seconded by Directors Shank and Camacho. Are there other nominations? Okay, with that, we'll close. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
I'll abstain.
Oh, come on, vote for yourself. Mr. Goodrich.
my
I'll say
apologies.
yes.
Just trying to keep the humor.
Hang on, in case of a swing vote. You never-
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Paskett,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Chair Richard.
Yes. Congratulations.
Condolences.
Now you get to do the next one.
All right, we'll now take nominations for chair of for the High-Speed Rail
I'd like to
Authority.
nominate Mr. Richard.
to
Second.
Thank you. Good. Okay, by Ms. Pesquet and a second by Director Schenk. Any other nominations?
Please.
Hearing none, please call the roll.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes?
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Paskett,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
I thought it better not to call Chair Richard.
All right. Thank you. So it's unanimous. Welcome back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well,
It was really very enthusiastic. Thank you very much.
yes. Thank you. Actually, I appreciate my colleagues. We've got a lot of work to do this year. This is going to be a very pivotal year, and I think we've got a great board, and looking forward to working with everybody. So, thank you. Let's just deal with the minutes, and then we're going to interpose an item before we move to number 3. Can I have a motion on the minutes for the last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Director Camacho, seconded by Director Schenk. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Paskett,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
Abstain.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Chair Richard.
Yes, thank you. Before we turn to the rest of the regular order, I wanted to spend a few moments talking about changes that we have that are very exciting for the program itself in terms of leadership positions at the authority. And it's a dynamic organization, and people leave, but new people come. And we've been very, very fortunate that there are 3 people that we can talk about who've joined the organization that I want to take a moment to highlight. I'm going to, I was going to mention one, and then Mr. Falens, as the acting CEO, will talk about some of the other staff leadership. But as you know, we have a partnership agreement. It's called the Rail Delivery Partner. It's a major contract that integrates with our own staff, and it's a way to expand the reach of the authority for the management of the multi-billion-dollar construction program that we have without building up a huge state staff, and also to be able to quickly access experience from not only nationally but around the world. The person who was heading the RDP effort, the Rail Delivery Partner effort for, I'm sorry, but I'm still going to call it Parsons Brinkerhoff. I know it's now WSP or whatever it is, but I haven't figured that out yet, and I'll get those initials mixed up. But in any case, the person who was heading that was Gary Griggs, a very fine gentleman I'd worked with on a certain transportation project in the Bay Area years ago. And he had retired. I'm very pleased that the leadership at PB, and we appreciate having their CEO here today, Mr. Kelly, brought in one of their top people, Roy Hill, who started on June 12th. Now, Mr. Hill hails from the United Kingdom. I did ask him whether he was coming here voluntarily or whether Brexit vote had meant that he felt compelled to leave. He assured me it was the former. But he's got more than 30 years of senior management experience in project management and business development. He's been involved with many, many projects, successfully delivering complex infrastructure projects throughout Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and the U.S. He previously, and this is most critical to what we're doing, held the position of interim CEO for HS2 Limited. That basically stands for High Speed Rail 2 Limited. It's the high-speed rail line that's being built in the United Kingdom, 55 billion British pounds, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually worth a little less than it was a few months ago. But that's just an inside joke. Anyway, he was at CH2M Hill in charge of their European region, and just has tremendous experience, everything from the London Tideways tunnels to the Thames water program delivery and so forth. So, Mr. Hill, welcome to California. Welcome to the program, and if you'd like to just take a moment and just introduce yourself, we're very pleased to have you and the experience that you have, particularly with high-speed rail.
Thank you, Chair Richard. It's an honor and privilege to be here. My visa of 850 pages allowed me to arrive this week, which is a great process. I think it was achieved in record time. But I am absolutely honored and privileged to be part of this great program. A lot has been achieved to date, and that stands for what has been done as a great team. But also, as the Chair said previously, this is a pivotal year and the program moves into a new phase. And I look forward to being part of a great team and leading a great team. And these things do have challenges, and I think we've heard a few this morning. I could tell you that the HS2 program in the UK, if I did a word search with California high-speed rail, you would swap them completely. They're interchangeable. The same challenges, the same problems, the same issues, but equally, the same great benefits can be achieved for the country. So I look forward to being part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And Mr. Felenz, I think you've added some top people in the organization, which is critical as we move forward here.
Yes, we have, Mr. Chairman and board members. We recently added a couple of new members to our executive staff that we're really pleased to have, and who have excellent backgrounds that are coming with a real enthusiasm for our project and really appreciate it. The first is Patty Nissinger, and maybe you can just stand up and
welcome.
Yes, and she is our new Chief Information Officer. She was in a temporary position for a short time, and now she is permanently our Chief Information Officer. She retired from AT&T in 2006. She has over 25 years of leadership experience covering large management, team management, and program management experience with various positions, all which are going to be very helpful for us. It's the IT acquisitions, project delivery, Chief of Program Management Office, IT Services Division, and she also worked at Caltrans for their 12 districts providing services when she came to the state. And in her role as Chief Information Officer, she'll manage the aspects of our program's informational technical services, which is really important for us to be very organized and state-of-the-art. And she will provide leadership for the development and implementation of these IT technologies, policies, processes, and procedures that will govern every aspect of our program. So we're really happy to have you, Patty. Thank you so much for joining us. And then secondly, we have a new Chief Administrative Officer, Rosemary Sidley. Again, coming to us with a vast array of experience. We're really fortunate to have her. She came from the California Highway Patrol and held numerous positions there, including Facilities Section Commander, Personnel Services Section, and Human Resources Section Commander. She has 30 years of experience with the state service covering all aspects of administration, including facilities, human resources, fiscal, budget analysis, policy development, and implementation. And while she's working with us as the Chief Administrative Officer, she'll develop, manage, and provide direction and oversight for these various functions, including business services, procurement for contracts, a big part of our program, EEO, human resources, policies, and records management. So really a key role. We're so pleased to have you, Rosemary.
Welcome, both of you. We appreciate your coming to work here, and there's a lot to do. You won't be bored. Mr. Felenz, very good. Thank you. Okay, let's move through the rest of the regular agenda. Item 3, consider appointing a designee to the Transbay Joint Powers Authority Board. Mr. Felenz, you're going to present this?
Yes.
looks like you're going to be at the mic for a while down there. The next 3 items. Ms. Rivera, you have time to get an auditor joke ready before your time comes up. I just wanted to let you know we'll be expecting one. Okay, good. Mr. Flens?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and board members, agenda item 3 is to consider an appointment of a designee on the Transbay Joint Power Authority. Recently, the Joint Power Authority invited us to become a board member on their board. We think it's really important and an opportunity for us to be involved in the Transbay Center, which is the northern terminus of our high-speed rail system in San Francisco downtown. That project is underway right now, and we will be using the Caltrain corridor to link into the Transbay at some point in time as a phase 2. They're now working on the bus terminal, and it was important for us to join at this time, we feel, because we're going to have a lot of involvement if we join now to kind of shape the decision-making that will lead to the entrance into the facility that we'll be using along with Caltrain on their tracks. They have passed a resolution inviting us, and just to give you a little bit of background about the Transbay program, there's various funding sources, one of which was we were involved in, and that was the submission of the grant request for the ARA funds, and in that request it included some funds for the Transbay terminal, which was $400 million that was directly provided to them, right. And they've been using those funds. And we, as a member of this board, if you choose to approve this item, we'll have authority to now involve ourselves with everything from this point forward as a voting member. There are a number of voting members, 3 from the City of San Francisco, 1 from the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, and 1 from Caltrain presently. So we would be added to that. And there is 1 non-voting member that's an ex officio member from Caltrans. The budget implications, we would only be subject if we had joined to any sort of fees, expenses that we would be assessed as one of the members, but we do have no liability for any debts or obligations that would be imposed on the authority itself. That
Just to make sure I heard you
Transbay
said
Authority.
We would have
none,
no
yes,
liability.
no liability. So
right.
Only this authority itself would bear those liabilities. So I'm happy to answer any questions. We've attached the joint power agreement that put in place the Transbay Authority, and also the bylaws are attached as well. And we ask that you consider and accept this invitation. There's a couple of things that I want you to consider. First is it could be either one of you as a board member to be a board member on this particular board, or it could be a staff member. And there's a mixture of both on the board. Some of the organizations have staff members, some have board members. So I leave it to you to deliberate on that and give us some direction.
Okay, before I turn to members, let me just make 2 quick points. The first is you referenced the fact that in the Stimulus Act, in the ARA funding grant agreement, $400 million was provided for the Transbay Transit Center. It's always a good time to remind people that that really was an accomplishment of leader Nancy Pelosi, who
Yep.
spearheaded that, and she gives credit for that $400 million investment in the Transbay Transit Center that was, I think, really critical to get it going. The second thing is I just wanted to let colleagues know that when this request came in, I checked with Secretary Kelly, because given the multifaceted nature of the transportation services going into the Transbay Transit Center, I wanted to see whether or not it was more appropriate for this to be done at the State Transportation Agency level. And I think they're very comfortable with this board taking the lead on it. So that might have been a question in some people's minds, and we did run the traps on that. So with that, let me open it up to Ms. Pasquette. You were kind of leaning forward. Did you have a question, or do you just always do that?
Well, you know me well, Dan, so thank you for being intuitive. No, I've read this board package, and I've talked to Mr. Filens, and I agree with the recommendation that's at the end of it, and I move the item.
Okay. We'll take it as moved, but I want to make sure that other members have a chance for questions and comments. Ms. Shank?
Yeah, thanks. No, just that we did discuss this in the briefing, and I appreciated the background efforts here. So do we have a motion?
We have a motion if you want a second.
Sure, I'll second.
Okay. All right, moved by Director Pasquette, seconded by Director Shank.
We're quite a team today, aren't we?
Director Lowenthal.
We are not going to designate the individual today, just,
Well,
Is
we're
that
not,
correct?
except that if a member of this board had a strong interest in serving that capacity, I think this would be the time for that person to say it. So the board can either designate the person, or we can delegate that designation to the staff. So maybe that's the first question.
Well, the way I read the board letter, Mr. Chair, is that is the direction, or did I read it incorrectly? That we're designating it to the CEO.
That we're delegating
Yeah,
to the CEO.
yeah,
Right, but I was just
We've
gonna-
drafted it that way, but we can certainly change the
I'm
resolution.
very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
You'll report in periodically, and I think that makes sense to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so too, but I didn't want to be presumptuous because I thought there might be a member who might have a specific interest in this, and if so, that they would have that opportunity. Ms. Shank?
Yeah, no, I just think it would be better to have as our senior staff person. Yeah.
I'm good with that. Yep. Okay.
okay. So in the interest of efficiency, I'm appointing Ben Treposis, our Northern Regional Director, to that spot.
Is that going to change anybody's vote?
I've already spoken to him. Just to let you know, I have had that discussion with Ben. He's happy to do this, so he will be the representative, and periodically he'll be at the mic here and reporting about it.
Okay.
Happy or just willing?
Yes.
Well, we
Oh,
want
no,
to be happy.
he's happy about it. That's
All
good.
right. Moved and seconded. Any other questions or comments? Suggestions? Okay. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Pasquette,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Chair Richard.
Yes. Okay, we're now going to move to item 4, which is perhaps the most important thing on the agenda today, because it's a demarcation of the program moving from the construction phase only into the initial beginnings of commercialization. And that, I think, is something that's very exciting for a number of reasons. So this is about the release of requests for proposals for an early train operator. Mr. Filens.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. If you recall, we've had a couple presentations already on this particular activity that's happening, which is the selection of an early operator to work with us. First, we had a report in the fall about our plan to go ahead with this. It's also mentioned in the business plan that this was a priority for this board to have an early operator procurement. And then back in December of 2016, you approved an RFQ for the early operator. The result of the RFQ is we had 5 teams qualified to receive this RFQ if you decide to approve it. And those teams are listed right here: China HSR ETO Consortium, DB International US, FS First Rail Group, Remfree, and Stagecoach Group, and the various entities in those consortiums are listed below the titles. And this procurement is a 2-phase procurement. This first phase in the RFQ is to ask them to work with us, alongside us, to help us with the procurements for the train operations, including track and systems, civil infrastructure, train operations. So they provide advice to us over a 5 to 6 year period, and the amount of money that we have set aside for this advice is $30 million over that time period. They'll be producing a financial plan during that 5-year period, where they're going to lay out their plan for operations, including how they would attract passengers, their business model, and other aspects of how it would be all financed, ridership and revenue studies. And so at the end of that first phase, then we'll go into phase 2. And this is going to be negotiated at the time, and this is contemplated in the RFP, that they would take up the early period of ridership revenue ramp up, and then slightly beyond that, so that they can get operations up and running. And at the end of that period, which is undefined at this time, because over the next 5 to 6 years, we will determine how long that will take for them to have this ramp-up period where the ridership goes from virtually nothing, because we just opened the system, to a point where no subsidy is required, which means that the ridership revenue pays for maintenance and operation. So this phase 2 is to be negotiated later. And if we can't come to terms in that negotiation period, then we'd just go out with another procurement to competitively bid for an early operator to run the train as a commercial enterprise during that period of time. At the end of the ramp-up period, which will decide the term during that later negotiation, we will then go out with a longer procurement to have a permanent operator, probably in the neighborhood of 20 or 30 years. We haven't really locked that down at this point. And they and others can then compete for that as well. So really, 3 different phases to get into operation. This consulting period, 5-6 years, early operations and ramp-up period, and then a final long-term procurement with maybe one of these operators, maybe not, after we go through a competitive procurement. So that's the format of it, and there's a lot of detail with the RFP, which is attached here. We have a competitive process. For this first phase, there's 3 parts to the evaluation, and for a total combined score of 1,000 points. And it's really broken down into 3 pieces. The first is approach and methodology technical presentation that they will produce in writing. And then secondly, there's a cost proposal. The cost proposal is really the rates that they would charge for the various experts they're bringing to the table for that 5-year period. And then we finally have an interview process that we will evaluate their ability to perform during that period to help us shape the program to a point where we succeed when we get to the ridership phase. And we think it's important to bring them in early, which is the early operator, because if they are part of our program now, we can have a much better opportunity to have someone embedded in our team who will be ultimately, possibly, the operator if those other negotiations happen later. And so they really have an interest and stake in it. And so we think that's really of great value to the program.
Let me just, if I might just expound on that last point just a bit, and then take comments and questions from members. Because I think this is really important, and I want to make sure that the public understands what it is we're doing here. First of all, in talking to people who have been involved in major project development, they often talk about the gap between the project design, it's constructed, and then somebody comes in to operate it and then looks at it often and says, gee, why did they design it this way? Why did they do that? And what we're doing here is to infuse commercial thinking into the design right now. So some of you may recall that several months ago I asked us to hold up on going out for the architectural services for the Fresno station. Why did I do that? Well, because the Japanese tell us that they get 32% of their revenues from the real estate development and the commercial activities around their stations. So we could have a world-class architect who could design the station, but wouldn't it be better to have somebody who can say, if you want to design the station so that you maximize commercial opportunities both within the station and around it, here's how the gallery should be designed, here's how the pathway should be designed, here's how the entrance and egress should be designed, here's how it should be oriented. So again, and where do we put the heavy maintenance facility? Well, yeah, we can make a decision, but it would be good to have somebody who has yes, I know, Fresno, I understand. But it would be good to have somebody tell us that that's commercially the right place, not just because nice people are from Fresno. So, and let me just take it one step further. When people ask how we are going to fund a $62 or $64 billion high-speed rail program, our analysis, our economic analysis shows that over the first 30 years, the net present value of the excess revenues that this program should throw off, based on very scrubbed down analytical work, is somewhere between 12 and $20 billion. I'm looking at Russ Fong, I'm looking at Thierry, they're nodding, which is good. So what that means is, at some point, we're going to ask the private sector to write us a check for approximately that amount, which will help us build that's a third of the cost of the system. Those people will look at what we've designed. They will look at what we've built so far, and they will say, am I really going to be able to earn this money? Or are there things in the design that limit me? And if they think that their latter is true, they're not going to write us a check for $20 billion. They're going to want to write us a check for $15 billion or some number less than that. The more we can infuse commercial thinking into the design now, the smaller the discount, risk discount we might suffer against the future revenues that this project produces. So this is as far as I can tell, this is unique in that people generally don't come into a project at this phase with commercial operators. So, and I know Danny Curtin has spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we want to make sure that we're not just hiring another consultant, but that we're bringing people on who will have skin in the game, because if they do this right, the ideas and the suggestions that they give us will be the things that they have to live with if they're the early operator to start it up. And if they do successfully get to that second phase, they will have to decide, okay, obviously there'll be a loss the first year or two. How long do I need to be able to recover that and earn the money I want to earn? The better the design, the better their suggestions, the more they live with that, the faster that process will happen. So there is a direct line of sight between the design and the construction today and the ultimate commercial operation. And as Mike Rossi likes to say, we're not just building a railroad, we're building an enterprise here. Our charge under the Bond Act is to build something that will be economically self-sustaining, not just to get it in the ground. So the idea is that one of these teams with international experience will help us do that and build it in a way that it will maximize its chances for commercial success. So I just wanted to take a moment and emphasize this, because I wasn't kidding before when I said I think this is a real inflection point for the program. So I apologize for going first. Let me just stop and turn to my colleagues and any comments that they would have or questions for Mr. Felenz. Let me start with Mr. Camacho.
Several questions, because I read through the procurement. It started off as an RFQ, so we selected based on quals. Then now we are into an RFP, and then we're going to go into best value. Help me understand that.
So the RFQ was the purpose of that is to make sure that the teams were qualified to be part of this procurement, that they had the personnel, the experience, the financial backing to deal with the ramp-up period. And having gone through that whole process, we found that actually all five who submitted statements of qualifications in the RFQ process would be able to compete and could possibly be the early operator for us. Now we give them the contract itself, the RFP, and this is a description of what they're supposed to submit for their proposal in a competitive nature with all five, and then that will be scored. There's a technical aspect, a financial, and an interview.
I get that. So, but we're going from an RFQ to an RFP,
right,
which is price-based by the nature of the definition of an RFP. Then we throw in a statement. The preferred partner may be the selection may be based on a bid selection in conjunction with a qualitative factors. What are those factors, and how do we make that clear to the people that are going to respond to this RFP, what we're looking for?
There's a number of sections in here that talk about the factors that we're looking for. We want to know their approach and methodology in submitting the financial plan to us. We expect them to kind of guide us how they would approach this enterprise, this commercial enterprise, as Chairman Richard had said. And so this is part of the qualitative evaluation. The quantitative, or the pricing, is really a function of what types of services will we get out of this procurement, because they'll give us their rates and we can see how many hours we'll get and the type of people. The other important thing is who's going to be on their team. What are their backgrounds? What are their qualifications? Because they'll be embedded with us, and we want the top-notch people from around the world that have the early operator or have operation experience to be part of it.
I happen to agree with Chairman Richard. It's an opportunity to infuse technical thinking into a design. But when I look at the budget that we're talking about a $30 million budget spread over 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So how much technical expertise are we really buying for $5 million? And is that enough, or does that limit their thinking? I mean, are they going to bring the best minds and best ideas, best practices, world-class system type of thinking for perhaps $5 million a year? I'm not encouraging necessarily that we spend more money just to spend more money, but I don't want to be put in a position that we get what we pay for. And we've limited the proposers by setting an arbitrary budget of $30 million. I'd like to understand how that came about.
Well, we do have the rail delivery partner that has a lot of experience with high-speed rail from around the world, and they've brought expertise to the table as well. But they're not assisting us as part of the operations phase at this point in time. That will be the early operator that will do that. So there'll be a fewer number of people on this team because, as you point out, the dollar value is not very high compared to all the other activities that we're doing. But the important thing is that they set up a plan for this commercial enterprise. And the plan is something that we would look at and evaluate during this process. So it's a small team embedded, and they're looking at all the procurements that we are putting out and what type of capital costs would there be for replacement, for maintenance, because they're going to have to take the ridership revenue and be responsible for paying maintenance and operations. And so they have to look at ridership as another element. So they'll be doing these activities and, of course, looking at the work that we've already done and will continue to do over the next 5-year period. So it's a small team evaluating everything that we have done and doing their own independent analysis of how this could function as a commercial enterprise, because then they'll come in with financial backing to take the next phase, which is the ramp-up period.
Chairman Richard, are they limited by this RFP itself, or can the proposers submit an alternative proposal which may be higher in cost, which exceed our $30 million for thinking out of the box?
Well, I was just going to make one point, which I hope was correct, and I'm not as hesitant as I would be if Mike Rossi were here, who would slap me, but Tom might. But I think this goes back to something, Danny Curtin and I have spent many hours talking about this, and one of the things that I would hope is that because of the second phase, and at least the way I think about the second phase is that the operator would say to us, okay, I've given you all this technical advice, now I want to start the system up. And my thinking is that negotiation is going to be about, I want to recover my costs and I want to earn X% return, and then we will arm wrestle with them over how long that should take and what that return level is. But that should be very lucrative for them. And so my hope is that in this first phase of competition, we will actually see people taking some risk to give us more than $5 million a year worth of engineering expertise. If they really want that carrot at the end of the, and in addition to just being able to earn their rate of return and meet their return hurdle, they will also be in the position of starting up the first high-speed railroad in the United States of America.
There's a lot of certainly gain for them to invest
Right.
and have skin in the game, as you put it. But what I'm suggesting is even to think out of the box in terms of the procurement itself, that we not limit them necessarily only to this type of an RFP, but to allow them to bring to the table an alternative proposal that they may even have much more skin in the game by an alternative proposal. It may cost us more money, but I think that we can approach it the way you're suggesting. Is certainly they will have the leg up going forward on the second phase, but from the very beginning, for them to bring us something that might, again, we can evaluate it based on this and an alternative proposal, saying they may have more skin in the game by offering many more services and much more information.
Well, let me turn to Mr. Felenz in both his capacities as the interim CEO and as our permanent chief counsel, because I think that gets into some, procurement structure issues that I don't want to opine on and trip over some legal issue. But Tom, what's your reaction to that?
So I think I understand you to say, well, can we restructure it? Can the submittal, the proposal itself, suggest something different than what we have outlined here? And generally speaking, the answer would be no, that we've kind of set the limits and for the procurement. So all the players, all five, know what they're supposed to be submitting, as opposed to an unsolicited proposal where they can just propose whatever they would like. Because otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fairly compare each one of them. So we internally have decided, this makes sense for us at this time. And it's not to say that we can't continue to look at this procurement, look at the contract with an eye and maybe that we want something different. But
this
we
is
think
formulated under a 2016 plan.
Yes.
And we all agreed to this. And this was based on variables into the future.
Yes.
Those variables have changed. Many things have changed based,
Right.
when the decision was made in 2016, we're in 2017 going, perhaps into 2018. Things have changed that I think that we need to think out of the box. When I look at some of the assumptions that we base much of our information on, ridership as an example, which you and I have had endless conversations on, we took an approach, very conservative approach on ridership. Ridership is going to pay for our system, part of that, and should be
Should pay
a lot
for all of
should be dependent on it. But yet we took ridership. As I looked at the numbers, I thought that there was something wrong because they seemed to be abnormally conservative, and in fact they were. As I asked questions, we never included any tourism or out-of-state travel coming to the state of California in any of our projections. To me, that makes absolutely no sense, because we have 150 to 200 million people coming to the state of California every year. I can tell you, when I go into Europe, I ride high-speed rail. If I go into China, I ride high-speed rail, or Japan. For the novelty, number one, also to get to a place from A to B in a quicker time frame. So for us not to have taken into consideration tourism into some of our projections make absolutely no sense. So maybe you could help me out, help me understand that.
We did consider that when we did the ridership calculations, and we decided to take a conservative approach, and that was really the premise of not including the tourism.
But that doesn't help us with investors or anyone else when they look at this if our numbers are abnormally conservative.
Mr. Camacho, can I just, let me just get a couple of other members in here, because I want to come back to your main point about innovation and flexibility, which is what I think I'm hearing you talk about here, and maybe we can do that. Let me just ask first Director Schenck and then Director Curtin.
Thank you. Actually, one of the early points that Director Camacho made, it was a question of mine too. It seemed like a modest number for what we are asking of these. So this is a really important step and a very good step and an innovative step in itself. But the $30 million seemed like a small sum. So just so that I understand, we're going to have the pre-operation, right? Then the operation, which will have a ramp-up period, and then a follow-on after the ramp-up period within which the successful bidder will have an opportunity to recoup. Am I understanding that correctly or not?
So the ramp-up period would be the phase 2, which is the early operations.
Yeah.
The term of that will be determined during the negotiations, and that term will reflect the ramp-up to get to a non-subsidy state, and then beyond that, to have them recover whatever losses they may have sustained during the ramp-up period because the ridership was too low to pay for all the maintenance and operation costs. We don't know what that period is exactly right now. I mean, we've looked internally and, have some idea, but this really, since they would be the commercial operator, it's really their decision as to what that period would be, which is get to a ridership state where you have no subsidy, and then beyond that to recover the losses. We will do our own calculations, and this is part of the negotiation with Phase 2. So they will be able to receive all the ridership revenue proceeds, or most of them, and again, that isn't completely determined, during that period, that Phase 2 period. And so the length of that period will realize in some sort of gross revenue. And so we're going to have to determine whether that's the right deal for us, and this is part of the negotiation that goes back and forth with us. If we believe either party, either the early operator or ourselves, after this initial consulting phase, believe that this isn't going, we can't come to a meeting of the minds, we can just opt out. And then we can put it out as another competitive procurement for this early operation recovery period. Then beyond that, there's a Phase 3 where that's like the 30-year operation.
That's down the line. But
Yes.
So the pre-operation period of the, I think it was the 6 years.
Right.
The 30 million. So there's some thought that is a small number, and they will recoup more of that than in the next phase.
Yes, they could. They absolutely could recover some of that in the next phase, but we're really paying for the personnel that they have and on an hourly basis, which is the $5 million a year. And, admittedly, it would be a small group.
Yeah, it sounds like a small number.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Director Curtin, and then Vice Chair Richards.
Thank you, Chairman Richard.
And I apologize for speaking for you before, so please feel free to say that I got it wrong.
As long as I can confirm what you're saying was not in some weird, I don't even want to get into national politics, we'll just leave it right where it's at. I want to first of all reiterate what Dan was saying about the commercial thinking that's associated with this and how critical it is at this phase. And I also want to say I sympathize with the concerns of Director Camacho, but I've raised these issues and had these discussions for quite some time with Dan and others. And while I have some concerns about this, the more critical element for me now is that we get this RFP out and we get an early operator on board. I would like to have seen this 2 months ago on board, ready to go, but we are at a very, very critical phase of high-speed rail. And I do want to express my concerns a little bit, but I want to preface that by saying it is so fundamentally important that we get this RFP out. I believe the teams that have put in their RFQs represent some of the best potential in the world, and I think we need to get this on and get it moving and get these people on board as soon as possible for all the reasons that Dan had mentioned and others. But I want to tell you my concerns were that the commercial thinking, which I believe is the critical element, has to do with money at risk. And my concerns about this RFP were that we did not put the at-risk element early enough in the process. We have an advice process for 5 or 6 years and a negotiation process, and I agree with Tom that you really can't pin down what the risk is going to be during the ramp-up period. We have one statutory requirement, is that we cannot subsidize operations. That is the fundamental at-risk component of this this early operator. It could be $100 million. I believe our analysis had a potential of $140 million at risk during the ramp-up period. I don't think anybody's going to really know exactly what that is until there's a ramp-up period. My concerns were that we weren't digging into the risk appetite enough in this proposal. I've raised those, we've discussed them. I thought an at-risk portion should be more evident in the beginning of this. The $30 million amount that Director Camacho is referencing, I thought was rather arbitrary. Just doesn't seem to make sense to me in the 5 or 6 year period. But to be honest with you, I think all of those things can be overcome during this process. And I think we have 5 good teams. I think they're going to look at this very carefully. And I believe we're going to get some very, very solid responses. Now, if they want to bring innovative approaches about taking some risk up front, I think that would be welcome, but I don't believe we can actually make our evaluation on that, but we should certainly look into that and be receptive to any ideas that come in that process. For me, the earlier at-risk component brings the critical commercial thinking to the table. If we simply have a time and material advice process, well, there's a likelihood that that team's not really going to have to live with their own advice. And to me, that's one of the fundamental differences that, but I believe that's going to be worked out in this process. To me, it's so fundamental that we get them on board early now that the rest is kind of details that will get worked out. To that end, I want to talk slightly about the evaluation because, again, I think the $30 million is sort of an arbitrary number. It's hard to figure out how you squeeze $5 or $6 million a year into this process. But I do want to point to 2 evaluation components. One is the small business utilization plan, which is 100 points out of 1,000, so it's not insignificant. I don't think that's really an evaluation process. I think that's a yes or no process. I believe we have I don't know if it's statutory or it's a policy.
We've established it, the 30% goal.
Right, so that's not like, well, show us your plan and we'll give you 100 points. If one of the teams doesn't have that plan, they don't get any points. It's not a question of, well, it's a pretty good plan, we'll give you 80. It's a great plan, we'll give you 110. So that's the kind of thinking I'm a little worried about. Now that we've established the pre-development at a certain nominal amount, we're sort of restricting, the evaluation, in a weird way. The cost proposal for the first year, I don't quite understand. And I want to reiterate, I'm not saying any of these that I want to hold this up and come back next month. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We got to get this out the door. And lastly, I wanted to talk to you about the activity description and the timing on this. I don't want to see this happening in December. I don't want to see the new team in December. I would like to see it much earlier than that. I've looked at this timeline. Some parts of it I don't quite understand. It looks like it's prepared to deliver a vote to the board in November. I think that's, if we could do it in October, better. If we could have a special meeting in early October, better, to deal with this just one issue. I don't know why they need a month between the release and the pre-bid conference. They all know what they're doing. Let's say we put out the RFP and we have the pre-bid conference almost simultaneous, like 2 weeks. All you need to do is get your airline tickets and bring your team in, and let's have the pre-bid conference. So I want to really encourage the expedition of the timeline here. I'm going to make a motion to pass this measure, but I also want to say that we need to have a sense of urgency of getting this team on board, especially now, because we are in the process of doing some very important things in terms of leadership of this organization. That, to me, is the fundamental one. I had concerns about the at-risk element. I thought it should have been put earlier on the team and see which teams were ready to accept that risk, what their risk appetite might be. But I'm more than willing to go along with this proposal, and hopefully the negotiations and the teams that we are dealing with bring a good faith effort to it. So I'm going to move it, and hopefully the discussion moves in that direction.
Maybe when you move it, Danny, you can have a provision into the staff to reevaluate the schedule and see if there's a way to
Well, I would rather do you know.
I'm just saying, we shouldn't do it arbitrarily here, but I think if you want to
Exactly.
put pressure on.
I don't think the schedule is in the motion, if I'm mistaken.
No, but it's in the RFP.
It is.
It's in the
It is in the
RFP.
RFP?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, we have a couple of days there. I would hope you could.
Yeah,
take
you
a
can
hard
ask them to just take a look at it. I don't think we want to chase anybody away because all of a sudden they can't meet the schedule, but I think your point about moving this organization to something that's operating on a much faster, more urgent time frame is very appropriate. So, so anyway, when you make your
I
motion,
appreciate that. That would be considered part of my motion.
Yeah, okay. Vice Chair Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with much of what Director Curtin and Director Camacho have said. Let me just ask a couple questions. In the RFQ, was there any mention at all about the proposed compensation?
Well,
As far as you recall, was the $30 million mentioned anywhere in the RFQ?
oh, yes,
Okay.
it's
No,
clear.
the RFQ?
In the
application?
RFQ.
Boy,
I don't think it
you
was.
think?
I don't think it
$30
was.
million?
Okay,
Probably
so
not the RFQ.
I happen to think that's pretty meaningful that it wasn't, because we got what appears to be 5 very competent, qualified respondents. So one of the, you know, just for nothing more than it was a term, but the determination of $30 million in whether it was arbitrary or not, that's how it's been referred. I'm concerned about if it was arbitrary. I'm concerned about where did it come from, and what sort of discussions and decision making was there in putting together, if there was in fact a schedule with the intent of trying to define how much is $30 million really the right number. Because when we have done is what we've done over and over in looking at contracts for consultants for this project, this would be quite a low contract, estimate of a contract for an activity that we've all agreed and strongly agree here is absolutely critical for moving this project forward timely in a commercial way. So apparently somebody's going to respond to this right now.
Yeah, Paul Neal's our Director of Commercial
Okay.
Activities, and so
All right, Mr. Gill.
maybe you can...
Chairman, Directors, I think the fee of 30 million was arrived at by an assessment of the type of effort the team considered would be appropriate for what we were asking of the early operator, recognizing that we were asking them to come in as a partner to the authority and the RDP to set up the future operational business, but also recognizing that there was already a staff in the authority and the RDP who would be carrying out the bulk of, for example, the design work, if we take the stations as an example, but asking the early operator to provide critical advice on certain aspects of that design, not taking over the whole design process, because, for example, some of it would not be of direct interest to the early operator, but the commercial aspects of that design of a station, for example, would be. So we're not asking the early operator to take over the whole design of the future business, but to concentrate on those elements of the future operation which have a commercial aspect to them, which would therefore enable them to maximize the return from the fare box and the ancillary revenues so we can future monetize the business. So it's very much a complementary partner to the existing authority and RDP and the other consultants, such as the financial advisor. So that was how we arrived at the approximation of 10 to 20 staff at that sort of 5 million per annum. But also in the industry outreach we did before the RFQ, we recognized that many of these international operators, their core business is actually operating railroads in their home country or in other franchised areas. They're not set up to be big consultants, so they have to draw these key personnel from their operating business, so they're not necessarily going to be able, even if we wish them to send hundreds of people to us. What we want is their very best experts and advisors to come in and be part of the team, not necessarily to take over the whole operation at this moment. So that was how we arrived at that figure.
So does that leave you confident with that 10 to 12 or 20 people that it may be and some of their best staff, that we're getting everything we need to help bring the commercial aspect of this project to fruition?
That would be our professional judgment. And also, they would be able to rotate these key staff. So it wouldn't be 10 people from day one all through the 5 years. As we move through the phases of the program, we would be able to bring in supplementary staff. So there'd be a core team which would be with us through the duration, but then specialist people could be added or removed as appropriate.
Well,
So it would
I
be
mean, I
flexible.
certainly agree with and endorse the at-risk component, what we're trying to accomplish here, unless it's at the cost of seeing these respondents walk away from the opportunity here, because it simply, if they determine, it makes no feasible sense when they're taking on what amounts to a 20%, a 1 in 5 chance of actually being selected.
So Director Richards, we did just check, and the $30 million was reflected in the
Okay.
RFQ.
I
So
think
they
that's-
were aware, that was, yes. So
Okay,
they were
that's-
aware of that.
that's very important.
Yes, we checked.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
I just wanted to, one other thing. I'm certainly concerned about that. I'm encouraged that that was in the RFQ. My hope would only be that, for whatever reason, people responded recognizing maybe 30 million was there over 5 years. They were not going to be awfully interested in that, but at least to stay in the game to this point. If your complete, professional opinion and based upon all the years of expertise and experience you've got, that's certainly encouraging. It's just for a project of this scale and for taking it in a commercial direction, it just seems awfully low. And I'm just like Director Camacho, and we're not trying to give away money. We just want to make sure that we're getting the best people to provide the advice and bring this to a commercial finality so that we can operate. One other thing I do want to just mention, and I noted it in in the Stagecoach Group PLC proposal. I would like to believe, and I suspect it would be the case, when I see that the likelihood there is that they may be proposing on behalf of either a new U.S.-based entity or a shell, one of their shell organizations. I would encourage you to be looking very carefully at who is bearing the risk. I don't think we want, if the implication there could potentially be that we're dealing with a shell corporation, that's not, I would think, certainly not what I would be looking for.
Okay, well, that would be a key part of the evaluation process going forward. Yeah.
I have a thought on this, but after Director Curtin's comment, I was going to make a proposal. So, Director Curtin.
Okay, well, I just sort of want to reiterate, we've been going through this $30 million number. That's why I did think it was in the RFQ. I was concerned about it then, but the reality for me was the at-risk element, and the ramp-up period is when you're not allowed to subsidize operations. That's what we cannot do. But the post-ramp-up period is where the team that is our early operator begins to see revenue. And then fundamentally, that's why you can't negotiate that now. We're not quite sure how long that will take. There's so many variables. But the real issue is their return, what return they're looking for and over what time period. 10, 20 years, can they last? Will they last? And I thought that the early investment in terms of workforce would be part of that recovery period, but it would put the at-risk period more up front. Having had all those discussions, I think we just need to move along here. The teams that are prepared to come in at a $30 million over a 5 or 6 year period and then negotiate what is potentially a long-term investment, we just got to take at face value that they're prepared to do that. If they end up investing more time than we're authorized to allocate, they can certainly build that up into their post-ramp-up return. Lastly, I want to reiterate what Mr. Flynn said about this is not really a cost factor for the agency because we hopefully will take this $30 million out of somebody else's hide, who I won't look at directly right now.
I think I'm looking right at the rows where they're nervous back there. Assemblymember Harambula.
Yeah, I won't be too long on this, but I wanted to focus on the scoring mechanisms if I could, and understand why you focused on the small business utilization plan as a tenth of the scoring. It seems as if the intent is over the entirety of the project and not each section, and so I'm wondering why a tenth of the entire scoring of this RFP is focused on that plan.
Well, the board has adopted a 30% goal policy that we take very seriously, and so we embed this within all of our RFPs as a requirement. And to make it a serious response from them and a thorough and serious response and a real commitment, we have placed that 10%. So we want it to be large enough that it's a serious commitment by them, and that they prove that to us in their proposal in some manner. And we're convinced that they are making that commitment, even though, as you point out, it's for both phases.
Hang on one second. So I was going to, listening to all of my colleagues here, I wanted to just put this on the table, and I do it carefully because there's been a lot of thinking that's gone into this, and I appreciated your responses and the thoughtfulness of that. But I'm also, I also think it was compelling what Director Camacho said about trying to bring in innovation. So I was wondering, I wanted to just put this on the table. Can we do an analog of what we do with our design-build construction contracts, where we go out and we tell people that here's the contract, here's the design, but you can come in and propose alternative means of compliance, if you will. So what I'm thinking is, and I'm also completely with Danny Curtin that I don't want to send this back and have it come back here. I think we need to do this today, and we need to get it going. But I'm wondering if we can authorize you to add a module that just says, this is the 30 million that's out there. But if you want to come in and tell us that for X amount more you would do Y services, then we will evaluate that. And we're not going to guarantee you that we will take that, but it puts the onus on them to be innovative and to show that that's cost effective. I think what it also does, what I'm most concerned about what my colleague Tom Richards said, which is we've gotten to this point where we've now qualified 5 international teams from around the world, from the Chinese, who have built the most miles of high-speed rail, to the Spaniards and the Italians and the British. We've got just a tremendous access here. What I don't want to do is to wake up and find that of these 5 teams, only one bid. And so I think we would then regret that, and we'd go back and ask ourselves what we did wrong, and we'd go back through the process again, and Danny Curtin would be taking well, I was going to say a pipe, but he's a carpenter, so he'd be taking a 2x4 and whacking us up the head.
It'd be a hammer, Dan.
That sounds even worse. So, so colleagues, I was just thinking that we go with the basic structure that the staff has put together, but we add a module that directs the staff to say, to the extent that you want to propose something in addition, you tell us what that is. We'll allow an innovation module, and we won't guarantee that we will make our evaluation based on that, but if you're compelling enough, then we might. Now, I should ask the staff first, do you see technical problems with doing this before I get people excited about it? Or
So one challenge, I think, for the staff is that we would need to know if we were adding more options or services or potential
We're not.
activities. You're not? Then we would need to know how much authority we have in terms of dollars
well, I
to
think
do
you'd
those
have to bring. I think what would happen is
Bring
you
it
would come
back?
back. You would
Okay.
come back to the board, and
Yes.
you would say to us,
Oh, okay.
either Either, we want to award the $30 million contract to such and such a firm.
Right.
And oh, by the way, we got these other proposals, but we didn't find them compelling.
Okay.
Or you would come back and say, we now want to award a contract of X amount because we found that some of these proposals were compelling and we think that we should do that. So either way, it comes back to the board, there's governance and oversight.
Right.
You make your evaluation, we get to decide whether we agree with that.
Mr. Chairman?
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, so putting on your legal hat, Tom, are we able to do that, which I don't know if that actually changes the basis on which we went out with the RFQs? Would we have to, if we did something like that, would we have to, in essence, republish and start all over?
Well, we were about to publish the RFP.
I'm talking about the RFQ.
No,
People
that
who
was
may
just-
not have responded because now that I know that the 30 million was in there, they'd say, well, for $30 million, we're just simply not interested. But if you had said that it's $30 million and now become innovative and you can propose, in addition to that, do we have any exposure with the challenge?
I don't believe so, because the RFQ qualified them to compete for the RFP, but they didn't know the provisions of the RFP yet, how it would be structured.
Okay.
So we can shape it now, which is really the reason that we're presenting it to the board, so you can see exactly what the RFP is. And if you would like to see some adjustments or changes to that, we can do that at this time. Then when we release it, officially release it, then that would be what everyone's competing for. And I think what you're doing is you're suggesting some of these changes to have more innovative, a chapter on innovative additional innovative proposals. And we can certainly put something in there. We'll have to think internally about what kind of parameters or guidance, so there's some, so they kind of know what we're looking for.
Because
Sure.
I think we're changing the conversation here, and it's getting me a little anxious. The issue for me originally was
Nervous, I think is the word.
No, anxious. At risk. This is not changing the at risk. This is saying, are we getting the innovation that we really like? What I'm saying is that we have really good teams here. I believe you have enough in this to evaluate and come up with a high-quality team. We're not adding to the at-risk component by changing the number or saying, gee, if you want more, you're going to bring more resources, we can negotiate more money. What the key is getting the best team and then really finding a way to move them in, and they should be finding a way to move as innovative way as possible. We're not going to figure that out on this board at this point in time, but if we add 20 million, if we make it a range from 30 to 100 million, what's your best ideas? They've looked at this at $30 million. We need to pick the best team, and then we need to hope that they have the capabilities and the motivation to fight for the contract on the ramp up and delivery period. That's the key. And by changing it now, we're just getting into, I think we're just starting to look into a rabbit hole, try to define it. I think you guys have, at least from what I can tell, feel you're going to get a high quality team out of this bid. Then these questions have to be answered in the next 3 to 5 years when you go to the negotiations. I'm very concerned about changing any number, because I know there would be like, well, if we knew it was going to be from 3 to 100, or if we knew it was going to be, we didn't really put it out right. So I'd really just like to move the motion with the idea that we're going to quicken the delivery time, and then, you know, put the burden on RDP and the leadership to make sure that this works out and we got the best team. The key here is getting the best team, not 30 million or 50 million. That's why it was always insignificant, and what time the at-risk portion of this comes into play. We're past all of that, I think, and I think we really need to move without too much.
Director Schenk wanted to talk, but I just want to say that actually felt like getting hit with a hammer, so go ahead.
You have a competitor for wordiness, Mr. Chairman. But you add a great deal. I certainly, what Director Curtin is saying about the best team is the bottom line for all of us. It raises a question, Tom, and I don't know if it violates any areas of confidentiality, but to me, what is missing here are the Japanese. They were the first, the best in class at the time. They have been participating all along, and yet they're not on this list. Is there anything that we can learn from this omission
Sure.
or absence?
You've had direct contact.
Yeah, as the board knows, there will be a number of capital procurements following the early train operator, including the tracking systems and the high-speed rail train sets. So our understanding or our belief would be that some of the other bidders who aren't on this list, perhaps the Japanese, are waiting for some of these other procurements. So people have had to make a choice. Do they go for the early train operator, or do they perhaps want to come in on the train sets or
Well, they're not going to be precluded, are they?
Yeah,
Well,
that was the concern. They are.
They are.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
If they were to help us shape and put out any particular procurement, which we want them to be involved in all our decisions. So if we went out with a train set procurement, if they provided advice to us or tried to help shape that, they would then be precluded.
Yeah.
So
That was my understanding.
so there's kind of a choice there that they have to make.
Right. That was my understanding as well, which is that they want to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, were there other questions?
I think that Director Curtin's comments are pretty compelling. I'm still concerned about the 30 million. That's somewhat tempered by the fact that it was in the RFQ. I was just looking again at the schedule for delivery of this back to the board, and I would encourage you, and I don't think it necessarily, unless it does, it needs to be part of a motion, but to try to shorten it up as much as possible, because I don't know what we're going to get at the end of the process. And so if that becomes an issue, it may delay what we're trying to accomplish here. But Danny, I mean, I hear you loud and clear, and I think that is compelling. I'm still frankly concerned about the amount, but if they knew it, we're going to have to wait and see what we get.
Let me just turn to Director Camacho, because he raised this question.
One last
initially.
question. So if we move forward, which I happen to agree with all the directors that have supported moving this today, which I do as well, does this preclude us during the RFP process then to solicit, to change some of the language of solicitation to encourage alternative proposals?
I think we'd be foreclosed. I mean, we've got to decide today whether we're going to.
Once we release it, I think we would have to make those changes before the release.
Well, that's what I'm talking.
Yeah.
At the time of release.
Yes.
So that the RFP does not affect us moving forward on this particular.
Let's make sure I want to make sure that you're hearing the question he's asking, so that there's no misunderstanding. Because my sense is that if we vote to authorize you to release this, we're talking about days or hours before this goes out the door, right?
Yes.
So I think Director Camacho's asking if there's an opportunity to rework this beforehand. I don't think that's contemplated, so I don't want to hear a yes answer to something that in fact is no.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility to rework it, but it may have to go back to, depending on.
My motion is to not rework.
Right.
In case
Right.
anybody's
I'm hearing
unclear
that you want this to move forward.
Yes.
So unless, you can clearly say, well, we want this change in the RFQ and the motion is based on what you presented plus this change, I mean, then we could do that.
Yeah,
But I
but
think
I
it's
just
very
wanted to make sure
complicated.
that Director Curtin wasn't thinking his motion said one thing and
Yeah.
Director Camacho was
Right.
thinking that the motion said something
Yes,
else.
right.
So I just
So
wanted to be
we would
clear on
go, so what I'm hearing is that we would go out with what we have,
that. Right.
with the idea that we would try to
Well, I think right now we
press
go
the
out with what
schedule.
we have unless this board just right now tells you to do something
That's right.
explicitly different.
That's right, absolutely, yes, yes.
Director Pascoe, you had something?
I do. I'm concerned about the schedule, so I want to underscore
He's
Director
concerned it's too
Richards.
long or too short?
It's too long. So I just want to underscore Director Richards' point, and I don't want to amend the motion or request an amendment to the motion, but I do want to ask Mr. Filens if it's possible to truncate this schedule.
We can do our best.
I think the key is to give the bidders sufficient period of time to put their bid together. So that's the core of the time. But I think we'll talk about it, and I would certainly think there's a possibility to shorten some of the time for the staff evaluation of those bids when they come in, and we would look also at the board's schedule for coming back. So
Right.
I think we need, it's already compressed,
good.
because as you know, we did miss a board meeting for good
Yeah.
reason. So, but we can look at this, can't we, Tom?
Yes.
I
yes.
appreciate that thinking, which is squeeze it on our side,
Yes.
not on
Right.
the contractor's
Yes,
side.
exactly.
Chairman,
Yeah.
if in fact we can make these changes, which are then part of published RFP, why is it we can't make the other changes?
Well, what we're doing is we're just.
I understand. What I'm asking for, some simple language to amplify perhaps the need for an alternative proposal. And I get it, I don't want to stop this procurement, but I'm just trying to understand staff's reluctance to make changes to the RFP when in fact you were agreeing to make changes here.
I think Director Camacho, if I might, I think that is not so much a staff issue as what I'm hearing from the board dynamic is, and I was very convinced by what you said, and I was also very convinced by what Danny Curtin said, which is you're saying, I'm concerned this is too small, and I'm concerned that we're not going to get the best thinking that we can get at this level. And Director Curtin is saying, I'm concerned that if we mess around with it, we won't really get anything else, because where he really wants to see us driving them is, hey, you guys may have to put up some skin in the game at risk that you hope to catch back later down the road. So I'm hearing him saying, let's not change it, let's go with this, and then let's have these people basically see who wants to really, take a little bit of risk if that's what it's going to take. And I am hearing the staff saying, we're not asking them to do the engineering, we're asking them to provide an advisory look over the shoulder, and so therefore it's not the same metric as if we were buying engineering services per se. So what I'm trying to do is see if there's a solution set that harmonizes all those. There may not be, we may just have to vote on the different approaches, but that's what I was trying to get to. I don't think it's so much a question of is the staff unwilling to do it. I think it's really, now I'm hearing there's two different approaches on the board.
Dan, can I,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Dan is fine.
May I, while we
Please.
have a pending
Yeah.
motion, propose a thought to you,
Okay.
as we do with some of the other boards. There appears to be some pretty important outstanding issues. There's time sensitivities, but there's also the scope on the amount. I agree with Mr. Curtin that we have had many presentations on this, and we've had the opportunity to look at it, and I'm concerned that we're late. But I also agree with my colleague, Mr. Camacho, that we don't want to make a mistake. And I'm wondering if a compromise would be to allow this to move forward today, but ask the chair to designate a working group from the board with Mr. Curtin and Camacho to work closely with the executive team to address these issues. We don't currently have it at High Speed Rail, I know, but it might be an opportunity to allow it to move forward, but allow the board a little more active oversight on an important issue in the meantime.
Well, I'm not averse to that, but I think we've got the issues on the table today, and I'm just wondering.
Call for the question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut off the date, but
What do you want to cut off debate?
we're going to take the pencil and start playing around, and every time we make a little change, it's going to have ramifications. I have personally tried my best. I got my points in. We spoke. This is the decision. I think it's defensible in every respect, and I think it will lead us to the best team. And if we start playing around again, we're going to delay this. I know how it works. We've done it too many times. So this is too critical to work on at the board up here.
Well, let me just
We've done it for months.
say this.
2 years ago, I believe this Was
No,
it actually proposed in some form?
This has always been a very thoughtful and a very collegial board, and a lot of the things we do, we were able to come together on, but that doesn't mean that everything is. And I think on this one, you know, try to find a way to bridge, but I think there are two different ideas here. And I don't want the staff to get stuck in the middle with it. I don't want to delegate to the staff a disagreement in philosophical approach on the board. So I think we've just got to make a decision. And Director Camacho, I understand where you're coming from, and I'd like to try to get there, but I think at this point, what I'm sensing is a majority of the board, and we're about to have a vote, feels like we just ought to go forward with this as it is, and you know, hold our breath and hope that we're getting the good competition, and that what you want will be embodied in the bids as people are looking at the broader opportunity.
And certainly staff has gotten the message, and they understand what the concerns are.
So
I'll move the motion, sir.
It's already moved.
well, why don't you, we'll add you as a second. Okay.
With the proviso, just so that we know that going forward with these procurements, especially as we're dealing with car procurements and the others, that we start to think out of the box from the staff perspective, because we're going to be asking these kinds of questions.
Well, okay.
So that we embody this type of thinking.
And
Okay.
I think this is where the board workshop that we want to do prior to getting too far into the next business plan, you know, maybe a series of board workshops where we can set aside time from the agenda so that we can have these kinds of discussions that you're talking about, and we can then infuse into the staff thinking, the policy directions from the board would be a way to not arrive at this juncture in the future.
You know, Director Richards, you made a comment of having maybe 20 people for this $5 million procurement, or $30 million procurement. But if I look at the full-time equivalents, billing rates, you're probably looking at best 10 people. So it's not really 20 people, or less than 10 people. So we really are not, I mean, we're not engaging a lot of money, but I think that we need to just think from a staff perspective, out of the boxes we're going to be asking.
But they do have an opportunity to recover that, and I think what I'm hoping is that they make an investment in this first phase that they try to recover in the second phase, and that'll be the proof of the pudding.
Very good.
Okay, so the motion, I'm going to restate the motion. The motion is to move forward with the procurement as laid out by the staff, with also the requested staff that it look at shortening time on the staff side to the extent that that's feasible. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Paskett,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Chair Richard.
Yes. Thank you all. I appreciate the staff input on this. I think it's helpful to the board. The next item is important. However, it is not going to take 30 minutes. I can assure you of that. I think that the board members know this item. So, Tom, why don't you make a brief presentation on it?
And I'll move it. I'll allow you to make it, but I'll move it. I've read the materials and support it.
Okay.
Make a brief presentation.
Sure. Well, we do have a few slides, if you want to see that, or
No.
the board
we're good.
preference. All right.
We've already seen it all.
No.
Any questions?
Yeah, here's one thing I want to do with this, okay? Because we heard a public comment this morning from an attorney representing plaintiffs who are challenging the action on this. And so I would like to put a couple things in the record before we go forward, okay, with just a brief colloquy. So first and foremost, while I appreciate the fact that the gentleman stood up here and propounded on what the law is, I generally think that's the province of judges and not lawyers for one side. So whether this is legitimate or not is really going to be determined elsewhere. However, the statement was made that we should check with our lawyer before we act on this. So, first of all, Mr. Flens, would it be your expectation that before the legislature enacted a measure like this, that they would receive advice from legislative counsel?
Yes, it would.
That would be my expectation as well. Without going into any matters that you might have told us that would be privileged and confidential, is it generally your position in your other capacity as chief counsel that if this board were about to enact something that you felt were contrary to the provisions of the Bond Act, that you would so advise us?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And yet this matter is on the agenda before us today, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I have signed off on this item as well as your chief counsel.
Okay. You signed off on it as well as chief counsel. Okay. Just in case it ever came up, I just thought that it would be good that the board, in fact, had those facts in front of it before it cast its vote.
Well, I move again.
Okay, move again.
And I'll second it.
Okay.
Mr. Richard?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to thank the Southern California staff for working on this for years and years and years. This has really been the most problematic intersection based on the railroad. So it's wonderful that we're going to get this done.
Thank you. And Director Lowenthal makes a very important point. As I understand it, this is like the first or second most dangerous at-grade crossing on the PUC's list.
The first.
And
Number
so this
one.
is the top of the list. And just so everybody understands what we're doing here, we are devoting high-speed rail funds to make an early investment to grade separate so that we'll be prepared for high-speed rail in the future, but will benefit and save people's lives in the interim. You snuck a picture in
I
anyway.
snuck a picture in because I just thought this was very illustrative of what we're doing here. So you can see the at-grade existing on the top, and then the after condition. So we're taking the road and going over the BNSF passenger line corridor, making it much safer.
You didn't show in the first one the car about to be hit by the train. That would have been more compelling.
That's right.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's been moved and seconded. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenk?
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Curtin? Director Paskett?
Yes.
Director Lowenthal?
Yes.
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Chair Richard?
Yes, and I'd like the minutes to show that Director Paskett was especially enthusiastic about this.
I was, and I am.
As was Director Lowenthal. Okay. Ms. Boehm, I'm sorry you didn't get to make your presentation, but all the better. Ms. Rivera, do you dare come up here now?
And I would only suggest on behalf of Ms. Rivera that this is not the least important agenda item before us today.
In fact, I think it's a very important agenda item. So, Ms. Rivera, welcome.
Thank you. Shall I start with the joke or end with the joke?
No, please start.
Depends on whether you want to soften us up or if you're afraid of what will happen.
An auditor was asked to audit the corner shop. He reported back, there are 4.
You reported back what?
There are 4.
I like that one. I think that might be your best to date.
Very good.
I had help.
I'd help.
Well, actually, that's kind of pertinent to what this is all about, isn't it?
It is. So good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here today to bring the results of the Audit Office's first external peer review. Over the last few years, we've been building the Audit Office. We brought the Audit Charter in 2014 to you. We hired auditors and began performing audits. And at the time, we determined that our audit should follow audit standards. Generally accepted audit standards, or generally accepted government auditing standards, or the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing as applicable. And those standards require that we have a quality assurance program to assure that our audits comply with the standards. We've developed that quality assurance program, including putting together an audit manual, which provides a consistent methodology for the performance and documentation of our audits. 2 years ago, we started performing internal assessments of our compliance, and we brought those results to the board in 2015 and 2016. Audit standards also require that we have an external assessment of our quality assurance program, and today I'm bringing the results of that assessment to you. The external peer review was performed by the California Association of State Auditors, which is a volunteer organization. I'm proud to convey that the peer review team found our internal quality control system was suitably designed and operating effectively. Everyone in the audit office put a lot of hard work and concentrated effort into this accomplishment. The peer review team also made some observations and suggestions for improvement, 2 of which related to the audit charter. Therefore, today I ask your approval of revisions to the audit charter. The peer review team recommended we clarify in the audit charter the CEO's responsibilities and list the services provided by the audit office. We also took that opportunity to include changes that came about in some audit standards last December, and then some name changes. Do you have any questions for me?
Members?
Mr. Chairman,
Congratulations.
I would only like
Thank you.
to compliment Ms. Rivera and her entire team. They have done consistently outstanding work, and as this board knows, we review all of the team's work at the A&E. A&E Architecture and Engineering. I've got my other hat on right now. The F&A committee. This latest win here gives us, in essence, a full seat at the table of those organizations, audit organizations that specialize in providing internal audits for state agencies, and you should be congratulated, Paula. It's wonderful, and we're happy you're not going to have to put the disclaimer on your audits from this point forward.
So are we. Thank you. I'll pass that on.
With that, I'd make a motion for, do we have, is it approval or just?
Yes, approval.
Okay, it's been moved by Vice Chair Richards, seconded by Director Camacho. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Schenk?
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes?
Director Curtin?
Yes.
Director Paskett? Director Lowenthal?
Yes.
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Chair Richard?
Yes. Thank you very much. I certainly share my colleagues' comments about the importance of the work you do and the excellence of the way you do it, so thank you. Okay, with that, we've completed the public session agenda. The board will now enter into closed session in the room off to the right. Colleagues will try to keep it fairly compact, but this will be about personnel matters. And then I'll come back and report afterwards if there are any actions from the closed session. So with that, we'll be in recess till closed session. Thank you.
Okay, the meeting is reconvened of the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board of Directors for June 14, 2017. The board has just completed its closed session. We took no action during the closed session, and there's nothing to report out to the public. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.